Good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Bruns-Ravel, and I am a volunteer for Ameya here in Ottawa, Illinois. I'm actually from Ottawa. Out of curiosity, okay, this is off script, guys. How many people have actually met the governor of Illinois? Not very many. How many people have had an opportunity to actually meet a candidate for governor? A few more. But I want to thank the gentleman sitting in the back or standing in the back that we're going to be introducing in a little bit, Ameya Pawar. He has chosen our little town here to do this wonderful live stream kickoff, not only with this phenomenal audience that we've got here in the house tonight, but out there on Streamland, we've got well over 100 in homes and businesses throughout the state of Illinois. We really appreciate the opportunity we've been given, but there's been reasons that we've been given the opportunity to have this town hall meeting here. Okay, Ameya and his family come down to Ottawa frequently. Starved Rock, this town is so rich in its history, with its railroads, with its roads, with the river transportation. This city is a perfect example of how we connect together as a community, and that is why this community has been chosen. Tonight we've got an opportunity to hear a man who is going to introduce a program, a new deal for Illinois. As I mentioned, I'm a volunteer here in Ottawa. After hearing what this gentleman has to say to you, we hope that you will take it to heart and volunteer as well, because without volunteers, our folks cannot do what they came to do. So, if I might, I'd like to introduce to you a friend of mine, Mr. Ken Brown.
Thank you so much, Steve. It's just a thrill to be here and to have Ameya present in the wonderful city of Ottawa tonight. We want to give him a very warm welcome. We're very excited. Just a little background on who I am. I moved to Ottawa from Chicago 33 years ago after graduating from law school. I'm now an attorney retired from the state of Illinois, Office of the State Appellate Defender. I handled criminal cases in the 3rd District Appellate Court over on Columbus Street for almost 29 years. Now in my retirement, I'm very involved in the community that I love. I serve on the board of directors of Illinois Valley PADS, which has homeless shelters here and in Peru. And I also serve on the City of Ottawa Board of Fire and Police Commissioners. I am a commissioner with the City of Ottawa. And just recently, I began serving as a case manager for the Long-Term Recovery Group, which is providing assistance in the wake of the tornado that happened in this area in February of this year. And I'm really honored to be doing that. Now, I first became familiar with Ameya when I saw him on Channel 11, Chicago Tonight. I was immediately impressed with his intelligence, his compassion, and his independence. I liked his new deal for the state of Illinois. As governor, he wants to rebuild our failing infrastructure. He wants to improve child care with universal child care, and he wants to create good-paying jobs. I particularly like the fact that as governor, he would work for fair distribution of taxes. He believes that the wealthy need to pay their fair share of taxes, and he would work toward a progressive income tax. Without further ado, I would like to ask you all to give a very warm welcome to gubernatorial candidate Ameya Pawar.
So good evening. How's everyone doing? Thank you for having me here tonight. I really appreciate it. It's truly an honor. This has been an incredible day. We started off the day at Starved Rock, went for a hike, took a tour around town, visited a couple social service agencies. It's just been an incredible day, and I just wanted to say thank you before I get started. My name is Ameya Pawar, and I'm the alderman of the 47th Ward in Chicago. And in January of this year, I threw my hat in the ring for the Democratic nomination for governor because I believe in social justice, I believe in equity, I believe in fairness. I believe everyone believes in these things. But if we elect people who hate government, if we elect people who hate the institutions they seek to represent, if we elect people who think that the best way to help working people is to take away their benefits, well, then our government at any level will never embody the values that I know that we all share as a state. And let me start by saying one thing. This is a simple truth. Whether you live in Ottawa, in Cairo, East St. Louis, Rockford, Chicago, or Waukegan, we're all neighbors. We're all Illinoisans. Our job is to take care of one another. That is the most basic charge of government. The idea that we come together and take care of one another as a society and lean on each other when we need help. But that no matter what happens, at the end of the day, we're in this together. But what I've seen happening in Springfield over the last 2 years is communities have been pit against one another, and all we do is fight one another over scraps. And most importantly, it's a false choice that we need to be thinking Chicago is the problem or downstate's the problem, and we need to be looking at it, one another as the other. That's just not true. What it is, when you think about the game and politics of people pitting us against one another, that is classic divide and rule. It is a tactic that has been used for millennia. It is a tactic that keeps people engaged in this battle that can never be won because the people at the top, primarily the wealthy, hoard all the resources, and so we don't look at them. It's a tactic that my family knows. My dad was born in India under British rule. What's important about that is the way the British ruled over the Indians for centuries. See, the British were few, and they were very wealthy. And the Indians were many. They were countrymen. And they were kept poor, starving, sick, and poor. But it's the way the British ruled over Indians that I think we need to focus on. See, what they did was they forced Indians to fight one another over scraps based on where they lived, based on what they did for a living, based on the religion they practiced. Countrymen, people who were neighbors, were forced to fight one another over these very trivial things. They were exploited so that a few can rule the many. And I think about what's happening here in Illinois and think about what's happening at the national level, and I don't see much of a difference. See, the thing is, we're not under colonial rule where you have a few wealthy people using physical violence to suppress all of us. But what is happening in our country, and especially in our state, is that there are a few folks who are using economic violence against all of us and keeping us divided and fighting over scraps. Now, I think the only way to fight back against an agenda that says the best way to help working people is to hurt them, an agenda that says the best way to help working people is to take away their collective bargaining rights, the way to fight that, the way to fight back against an agenda that keeps us fighting over scraps, is to recognize our common humanity, is to recognize that at the end of the day, no matter what happens, we're neighbors, and we should act as such. And so our campaign, we call it a New Deal for Illinois. It's a new deal for the 21st century based loosely on the original New Deal. That FDR cut in the wake of the Depression, where he brought together factory workers and farmers, rural communities and urban areas around this idea that when the economy was totally out of whack, that when the economy favored a few and most people couldn't get ahead, most people were standing in breadlines, 90% of kids in rural counties in Illinois were malnourished, that the best way to help those folks was to bring everyone together, restore dignity to work, and invest in one another and invest in communities. So our New Deal in Illinois rests on 4 key planks. The first is we have to double down on public education, namely neighborhood schools. And that means recognizing that if we continue relying on property taxes to pay for public schools, that's how you get to a place where there are a few enclaves in this state that can spend $20,000 a year per student, and every other community around this state spends a fraction of that. And that means that the pie that we spend on education spending doesn't need to be cut up differently. The pie needs to be bigger. The second plank is universal child care. The easiest way to sum this up is if we say we have family values, we actually have to value families. And that means that if you have a child, it shouldn't put you out of work. That the cost of childcare shouldn't be such that it's more than what you take home every month. And it also recognizes that for every dollar you spend on early childhood education and pre-K programs, we save $7.30 elsewhere in our economy. I can't think of a better investment that gives you 730% returns than investing in quality childcare, investing in pre-K programs, and doubling down on our families. The third plank, just like the original New Deal, it is investing in infrastructure, rebuilding our communities, but most importantly, not only rebuilding our communities, but rebuilding our communities that have been left behind through disinvestment, communities that have seen job losses because factories left, or jobs that were lost to automation, communities that need to be at the front of the line when the money tap opens. See, the thing is about jobs is the economy's changed over the last 30 years, and people have been left behind. And I see this everywhere I go around the state, whether I was in Cairo 2 weeks ago or in East St. Louis after that, or in Rockford or in Chicago. When you create a good job and you pay a solid wage and you pay a prevailing wage, you provide good benefits, and you rebuild communities using the community to rebuild them, well, that's how we created the greatest middle class this country's ever seen. And that is what we need to do in our state right now. And then the fourth plank, the final plank, is criminal justice reform. And the only reason I have to stand up here and talk about it is because we haven't done enough to invest in public schools. We don't invest in working families and in universal child care. And we haven't done enough to create jobs. And so we can either keep spending $1 billion, $1.4 billion every single year on our prison system, knowing that 50% of folks who come out go right back in because we haven't taken the time to invest in reentry programs, or on the front end, better yet, invest in childcare or in schools so that we don't even get to that place in the first place. So we can either continue to be reactive and we will solve the social problems that we need to solve today. But going forward, it's time that we invest in one another. All of these things that I outlined cost money. All of the issues that I outlined and the planks require new revenue. And I'm going to be honest, we cannot cut our way out of the logjam in Springfield. But that means the only way to pay for the things that I know we all care about, when I talk about social justice, equity, and fairness, those values that I let off with, it means recognizing the wealthy need to pay their fair share. I don't have a problem with wealth. I think wealth should be celebrated. I am just tired as a society that we all worship it. Because if we continue worshiping wealth, we're going to continue electing people who've never held office, who've never taken a vote, and don't even believe in the public institutions they seek to represent. So I'm going to close with this. I talked about divide and rule. I talked about my dad's experience. But the thing that you need to know about the most tangible, manifest way I see how divide and rule plays out is when I see my dad every single day. See, he grew up in the aftermath of colonial rule. So he's 5 years old when India gained independence. So he grew up in a home and in a country that was very poor. So he didn't have any running water or electricity. He had typhoid as a little boy, and he lived off of rations. So my dad grew up to be 5'2" because he was malnourished, starving, and sick when he grew up. Now I was born here in Illinois, and I'm 6 feet tall because I had food to eat. I didn't have to worry about health care, and I didn't have to live off of rations, and I had clean water. So my parents were able to live out the American dream here in Illinois, and I'm telling you, everything is not broken, despite what people tell you. Everything is not terrible. We live in the 5th largest economy in the country. It is $700 billion. The problem that we need to solve is knowing that all the resources are clumped at the top, and the game of divide and rule is used against us by pitting us against one another. So I chose Ottawa tonight because I love it here. My wife and I come down here all the time. My wife also worked here in 2004 as a FEMA fellow. She was one of the responders to the tornado in Utica. So we have a personal connection here. We're neighbors. We need to come together. We need to work together and start investing in one another and stop fighting one another over scraps. Don't let one person who's not interested in any progressive change, who's only interested in accumulating wealth, split us apart. Thank you so much, and I hope that you'll join us. And let's open it up for comments, questions, and concerns.
Hello, I'm Maggie. I'm a volunteer for the campaign. Thank you, Ameya. We're going to start with a question from Amy S. here in Ottawa.
Thank you for coming to Ottawa, first of all. My question, you mentioned this in your speech about the divide and kind of this divide and conquer. So how would you as a candidate approach in campaigning kind of bridging the gap between Chicago and the rest of the state? And then also, another part of that is it's very difficult for Democrats in this area and in other parts of the state when they get tied to Speaker Madigan and this Democratic machine that some people see as negative. So how would you as a candidate kind of approach that and try and bridge that gap? Because I know you mentioned that in your speech, but how would you go about that? Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a great question. Look, part of our plan is we are visiting every county in the state. Because, look, I'm a Democrat, and I'm a proud Democrat. But I also realize that people don't get up in the morning every single day and look in the mirror and say, I'm a Democrat or a Republican. People just want the basic things in their communities addressed. That doesn't mean come election time we don't choose. But we shouldn't be so divided that we just define ourselves based on a party. Again, we're neighbors. So our approach has always been is you don't write people off based on who they voted for in the last election. And part of our approach is also to go out and talk to people about, look, this isn't an either or. Don't ever think that, I know Governor Rauner likes to say, and come downstate and go to Central Illinois and Southern Illinois and say to people, the reason you're not getting your fair share of investment or your schools aren't funded is because Chicago gets more than their fair share. What I'll tell you is nobody's getting it. Unless you live in a wealthy community, no school district is seeing the dollars that they deserve. Unless you live in a wealthy community, jobs have been disappearing from the inner city and from small communities for over a generation. And that's because of trade deals, that's because of automation. And rather than the conversation being how do we invest in one another so we can rebuild our communities through infrastructure and put people back to work, we have politics here at the state, at the national level, in Missouri, in Wisconsin, where you have governors that think, you know what, let's cut people's bargaining rights. Let's take away their union rights. Let's gut their wages. And if we cut someone's wage who makes $25 an hour, we can make 2 jobs for $12 an hour. That's the mentality of Bruce Rauner, is that he doesn't see the value in people making a solid wage. See, here's the thing what's happened in this country. it's become okay to question the salary of a carpenter or a teacher or a union worker and think that the best way to help them is to cut their wages. And that makes for better reform. But if you question the salaries of someone like Bruce Rauner who makes $200 million a year, somehow you're not a capitalist or somehow you don't believe in America. See, that's a false choice. It's just not true. Wages have gone down over the last 40 years for everybody. And the best way to help people who live in small towns and in big cities is for all of those folks to come together and create jobs for one another. We depend on one another. We're connected.
The next question is a video question.
Hi, Ameya. This is Nikki Davidson from Charleston, Illinois. I'd like to know how you're going to implement a progressive income tax when it's against the Illinois Constitution.
That's a great question. Like I said before, we're not going to be able to cut our way out of the budget mess. Truly, we're not. Because we don't spend enough on the things that we care about, like public schools or health care or on social services. So what that means is we need a progressive income tax, which means it's like your federal tax. The more people earn, the more they pay. The problem is our Constitution requires a change in order to do that. But there is another way around it. I'm not saying we give up on changing the Constitution, but there is an immediate thing we can do today, and that is you can raise the rate and up exemptions. So you can cut taxes for 70, 80% of people in Illinois. You can cut their taxes by making wealthy people pay their fair share, and you would have more money in the pot and more spending for people who make less money. And what I'm suggesting is not something that's crazy or some radical lefty proposition. This is what almost every single state in the union does. We're just one of a few that doesn't tax fairly. And when we have a flat tax, what that means is it puts an unfair burden on all of us. And everyone else at the very top, those few people, they get away with not paying anything or not paying their fair share. And that is why we're so divided. Because those are the same folks who tell us, if you and I fight one another, it's about either or. It's not, what they want is to distract us from looking at the top. And my point is, we can't let that happen anymore. We should unite around a progressive agenda. We've done this as a country with the original New Deal. Now it's time to cut a 21st century New Deal for ourselves.
Our third question is an email from David Dinoff. As governor, what are your plans to reverse the tide of the state's massive population loss and entice the workforce to retain residents of the state? What would you do to attract residents who have left back to Illinois?
So, does anyone know what the Illinois Policy Institute is? Right, they are a very right-wing leaning think tank, and they had this article a couple months ago about the Quad Cities. They had an article about John Deere International, which is based in the Quad Cities on the Illinois side. And what's interesting about that is they were saying, look, you have all these great executives and managers who work in Illinois during the day, and then come 5 o'clock, they get in their car and they drive across the bridge over the Mississippi into Davenport, Iowa. And then what the article will say is, that's why Illinois is broken. We're overtaxed. Everything's terrible. People don't want to live here. And then the article ends. What the article won't tell you is that across that bridge in Iowa, their tax rate goes from 2.9% to 9%, meaning it's even less than our tax rate in Illinois, which is 3.75%. But the more you make, the more you pay. What do they get in exchange for that in Iowa, across that bridge? They get school systems that aren't worried about opening in the fall. They have universities that are properly funded. They're not worried about providing financial aid to their college students. They have social services that aren't on the brink of collapse. See, here's the thing. Job creators employ people. And sometimes a lot of those people have families. Those families sometimes have children. And those children go to school. They go to parks. They enjoy their library. My point is, if you take away funding for basic services in government, and you demonize government and you strip it away, like our current governor has, that's how you get to looking around and thinking, what am I getting for my tax dollars? So stability, fairness, equity, that's what people seek out. You want to grow the population? Invest in our public institutions. Invest in Starved Rock. Invest in our river towns. Reinvest in our tourist infrastructure. That's what's going to grow the state. Invest in our universities. We shouldn't let Eastern and Southern worry about whether they're going to open in the fall, or Chicago State and Northeastern. These are the institutions that make our state great. They're what makes our country great. And rather than doubling down on them, we're starving them to death.
Our next question comes from Mary G. in Ottawa.
Thank you. As you know, the national government has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Accords, and some governors, mayors across the country have stated that in their state they will continue to abide by that accord. What would be your intention as far as that goes, and what would be the economic impact of that?
I say this at every event that we do now. I'm sorry that as an elected official, even though I don't represent all of you here, but as an elected official in this state, I'm sorry that we keep having to have conversations about protecting our communities from our federal government. So I think the only response is that as a state, if the federal government isn't going to help us out and fight climate change and protect our environment, well, then we have to step up as a state. So in Chicago, we're home to Lake Michigan. And the president right now wants to cut funding for the Great Lakes to preserve and protect our water. Now, I don't know about you, I don't know a single human being that can exist without clean water. And the idea that we are talking about defunding the Great Lakes Initiative or not protecting our clean water just doesn't make any sense. There's no profits, there's no money, there are no jobs, there are no people without clean water or without a safe environment. This has never been an either or. Anyone who tells you that it's either jobs or the environment is lying to you. What they're focusing on is profits for a few giant companies, because the jobs of the future are in clean energy. So my answer to you is, of course, we will join the U.S. Climate Alliance. My background, and really quickly, I talked about my wife responding here as part of FEMA. Both of our backgrounds are in emergency management, disaster, and poverty. And a big chunk of the work that we did in our research was looking at climate change. And how do we make communities stronger and prepare them for the future? And how do we prepare them for the future? By creating jobs so that communities become more resilient to these things. So this is something that's personal to me. So this is a human rights issue at this point. It is a human rights issue because none of us exist without clean air or clean water or a safe place to live.
Our next question is a video question on immigration.
Hey, Ameya. My name is Ugo Okere, and I'm hosting a watch party right now on the north side of Chicago in Rogers Park. My question for you is, considering this new administration's rhetoric around undocumented immigrants, how will you, as governor of the state of Illinois, ensure that our state becomes a sanctuary state for undocumented immigrants and their families?
Here's another simple truth. I don't believe any human being is illegal. I think using legal terminology to apply to our fellow neighbors, our friends, our family is immoral. So the governor has an opportunity right now to sign the Illinois Trust Act. He should do so. But if he doesn't, and I'm elected governor, that is one of the first things I'll do, is immediately sign the Illinois Trust Act. What's happened, and I think we need to answer this question in full. See, our politics in our country now has gotten to a point where, because so many people have been left behind in small towns and in big cities, and that people are worried about their own families, there's a lot of economic anxiety, fear about what's going to happen, how they're going to provide for their children, that when everyone is concerned about what's happening to them and their family and their jobs, it's easy for someone to say, the reason you're not doing well is because of those people. That's the easy thing to do. And if you look, the people who are telling us to blame those people, whoever those people are of the day, one day it's immigrants, then the next day it's refugees, then it's urban areas, then it's rural communities, then it's unions. Think about who's telling you that it's those people's fault why you're not getting ahead. The commonality is it's always one of these rich guys. It's always one of these wealthy politicians who tells us that it's the other person's fault. And the only way to fight that is to recognize that, again, it goes back to as a state, we're in this together. So on LaSalle Street in Chicago, where they trade all the commodities, and you have all those traders in finance, those high flyers in finance, well, none of that exists without what gets grown on the farms in central and southern Illinois. They would have nothing to trade. We're connected. And if we let these few people around this state and around our country tell us that we need to be at war with one another, this is a race to the bottom. And the only people it helps is those guys, because they just keep getting richer and we keep suffering. And so my point on immigration is, let's take a step back and recognize that this country's brightest days was when we welcomed immigrants from Europe, welcomed immigrants from India like my parents 40 years ago. We resettled refugees in this state. We have a proud history of resettling refugees from around the country, refugees who have literally walked across continents to come here to start their life over, escaping terror or persecution or murder, to come here. And our darkest days in our country is when we interned the Japanese, or when we turned away the St. Louis, a boat full of Jewish refugees because we thought they were spies. We sent them back out to sea to die. So we can either continue looking inward because we let a few people tell us that we're all so different, or we can recognize we're just neighbors. We might look different, we might talk different, we might have different religions, but at the end of the day, we all want the same things. We just want a stable life for ourselves and our families.
At Max R. Bever asks, how can Illinois provide universal child care for families across the state?
So, childcare, it's unbelievable how expensive it is. We have a 15-month-old, and so we didn't know anything about childcare until we got put on wait lists. And then after our daughter was born, we still didn't have anywhere to put her because we were on wait lists. And then we finally found a great place. But it's staggering how much childcare costs. And what the thing is about universal childcare and paying for it is there's a few ways. As part of our criminal justice reform, one of the things that we're proposing is that we legalize and we tax and regulate marijuana. So we stop sending so many black and brown kids to jail for low-level drug offenses. So we allow people... And so we allow people who are in pain to manage that pain, and we can actually tackle our opiate problem, which is ravaging communities across this state and around the country. So we can do that. And the funds you generate by legalizing marijuana will allow us to expand the current child care assistance program in the state of Illinois. And what I believe is if you make $75,000 or less, there should be some state help for you to pay for child care. So having a child doesn't put you out of work. You know, there's an article I read recently, and what becomes tough and this is a gender equity issue, because primarily after having a child, it's women who get forced out of the workplace, even though it's fine if you choose to, or if you have the means to. But it's primarily women who get forced out of the workplace. If you think about the gender pay gap, some of that's caused by this, is a lack of quality childcare. So I was reading this article that my wife quoted back to me, and she said, you know, she's the breadwinner in our home. She is. And what she quoted back to me out of an article, she's like, what the thing for women is, if you're working, is you have to go to work and run a career like you don't have children, but then you have to be a mom like you don't have a career. And you're put into an impossible situation. And that's wrong. Other countries have done an incredible job. Other states are doing a better job. We should support working families. And by creating a subsidy for childcare, you're putting more money back in the pockets of families who are going to spend it in the economy. And that's how you create a stimulus effect and a multiplier effect.
Our next question comes from Marcia P. here in Ottawa.
Hi.
Hi. If the ACA is repealed and replaced with Trump Care, what will you do to ensure that the citizens of Illinois, especially those with pre-existing conditions, have affordable health care?
That is a great question. Again, I am so sorry that as an elected official, I have to stand here and say we have to protect our communities from a different level of government. If the ACA is repealed and replaced by whatever version the House passed, 1 million people in this state will lose health care. 1 million neighbors. And the thing is, we're going to pay for it one way or the other. So I'm sorry that we have to keep having this conversation. So to answer your question, if that happens, then we will follow the lead of California and New York and go to universal health care here in the state. And we will pay for it, and we will take care of one another.
Our next question is a video question on education.
Hi, Ameya. I'm Ashley from Brookfield. Funding in Illinois education continues to be a problem. How do you plan to address the needs for all of our students?
That's another great question. Here's the thing about public education spending. When we rely on property taxes to pay for public schools, if you live in a wealthy community, you get to spend more. If you don't live in a wealthy community, you have to tax in a regressive way, meaning you hammer middle-class folks, and you still have to do it less. And so that's how you get to places where you have $20,000 a year per pupil spending in very wealthy communities, and most every other community around the state does with half of that or less. How do you lift all boats if you have that much disparity in how much we spend on a child's education? Your zip code shouldn't determine whether you have a fair shot at the American dream or not. That's just not right. But let me also say this. It goes back to what I said before. We live in a very wealthy state. It's the 5th largest economy in the country. It is a $700 billion economy. The money is in this state. We just don't have the will or haven't had the will to make sure that everyone gets a fair share of that investment. And so that is how we get to a place where you have the 5th largest economy and almost dead last in public school spending. How is that possible? Well, that needs to change. And that means we have to focus on equity. And equity does not mean equal. Equity means you spend money where it's most needed. And where it's most needed is pretty much every community in this state. Because you go to every community and it's the same conversation. That's why I keep telling everyone, we're not so different. We might live in different parts of the state. But think about what your school funding level is. It's not enough. Art, music, recess, PE, these shouldn't be luxuries. They're just what's normal in wealthy communities. And every other school district has to figure out how to make these luxuries that maybe we can scrimp together and figure out how to offer these basic classes. So that means changing the formula, more money in the pot, not cutting up the same pie differently. The pie has to be bigger. And again, it goes back to making sure that everybody pays their fair share.
Just a couple more questions. This next one is from @AlanGrafton from Twitter. I support your policy on marijuana legalization, but how do we accomplish this, and how will you protect the state from federal regulation?
We will follow, there are things that we can learn from the state of Colorado. The state of Colorado has done a fantastic job in legalization. That doesn't mean there aren't unintended consequences, that there aren't problems that you have to fix. But we will protect our communities from the federal government. We will make sure that people can purchase marijuana legally from mom and pops. We'll make sure that big pharma is not the one that controls the industry here in Illinois. Here's the thing. This is a criminal justice and social justice issue that happens to generate revenue. Probably not, but I know there's machines out here, but what I'm saying is part of the reason I'm not in favor of expanding gaming or casinos is because I don't believe that you should cause and create a social problem just to collect money. If we want to collect money, and if we need to pay for things that we all care about, then let's have the honest conversation about how to get there. It shouldn't be off the backs of the poor, and it shouldn't be off the backs of seniors and vulnerable communities. With legalizing marijuana, look, marijuana use is the same for those who smoke or take it in a different way, whether they're white or whether they're black and brown. In Chicago, we decriminalize small amounts of marijuana, but it's only black and brown kids that are still getting arrested. And again, it goes back to, why are we spending $1 billion a year in our prison system? Why not spend it in our communities and one another today? And so public opinion's changed. We need to get with the times. And I also think that it's time that we start generating revenue and paying for things like universal child care so we can start investing in one another.
And our final question is from Steve G. here, right in Ottawa.
Welcome, Ameya, and thank you for taking my question. In your campaign literature, it suggests that you would be a governor who would stand up to Springfield politicians. Mm-hmm. Now, as a Democratic governor, you would be likely to have a Democratic Senate and a Democratic House. As much as I might like to hear you name names.
Madigan?
Thank you. But what specific characteristics do you and behaviors do you think need standing up to?
That's a great question. When I first ran for alderman in 2011, I didn't have any endorsements. I didn't have any money, and I was running against a 35-year incumbent initially who had $1 million. So I just knocked on every single door, and I created my own luck, and we were able to pull it out. But then when I got into office, remember, our current mayor, Rahm Emanuel, did not support me. He worked against me, and so did everyone else in politics. But then when I got into office, I didn't say, well, you didn't support me, so you're my enemy. Or because now people say I'm the outsider, I'm just going to try to maintain that image of myself, so I'm not going to work with anybody. The thing about democracy, the thing about being a legislator, the thing about being a progressive is that you have to make progress. And so I ran for office. I term limited myself. I said I would only serve 2 terms. So no matter what happens here, I'm not running for my office again. I think turnover is a good thing. But my point is I started working with the people who didn't support me. And in times, we haven't been able to get along, and other times we have. But as a result of working with my colleagues who didn't support me in the political process, I worked to raise the minimum wage in Chicago. I was the co-chairman of the Working Families Task Force in Chicago, where we, starting July 1, 500,000 of our neighbors will have access to paid sick leave. I worked on government reforms to create the nation's fourth independent budget office. Worked with our labor partners to combat wage theft. My point in all of this is I built a record by working with people who didn't support me. I built a record by making progress. It's the same thing in Springfield. There are personalities. Do I think we need to have legislative leader term limits so we don't have the same speaker and the same Senate president for decades on end? Yeah, that's fine. We could do that. But I'm not going to come in and say, you didn't support me, you're not with my agenda, so we're not going to work together. Because guess what? That's what Bruce Rauner's doing. Well, look where we are. Democracy is about getting things done. You set personalities aside after the election's over. And that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I've done, and my experience shows it. Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to close by saying, truly, thank you for hosting me here today. You know, we have over 135 or 40 watch parties. So what's interesting about this is we're not just talking to the folks here, we're talking to probably well over 1,000 people across the state who are tuning in online. Thank you for participating in the process. Our goal is to get around the state, go to every single county, and have this same conversation, whether it's a red county, whether it's a blue county, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, because again, I don't believe it makes sense to write people off based on who they voted for in the last election. Politics has to end after the election's over, and then it's time to go back to being neighbors and working together, working for each other. That's what I'm going to do. It's time to start healing the divides and bring people together around the common inequities that touch every community so that we can start solving problems, but recognize that we have a lot more in common than we do apart. I hope that what I've said today makes you get out your clipboard, lace up your boots, and get involved with our campaign. We have a One Illinois tour scheduled for this summer. If you want to get involved in our campaign, go to pawar2018.com. There's a link for you to sign up. Get involved in our campaign. I'm not going to be the best funded campaign in the race. I'm not a billionaire. I'm not a millionaire. I'm not even hundreds of thousands of it. I'm just a normal person, an average person, running for governor because I care about all of our state, and I care about our public institutions. And frankly, I feel like everyone that's tuned in tonight cares about them as well. So let's stop letting a few wealthy people divide us and fight over scraps, and let's unite around a new deal for Illinois. Thank you so much.